Hi, my name is Mary Jo Webster. This is an introduction to how to use the function VLOOKUP. We're going to be working in Excel today. However, this function also works in Google Sheets. It is how you can marry two data sets together, or what's called joining. It doesn't quite work exactly the same as joining in some other programs, but it's going to take your analysis to a whole new level. I'm going to use a relatively simple example today just to help you understand how this all works. So in many situations you might have some data such as this. This is census data from the 2020 census, and all I have here is a state postal abbreviation and the 2020 population. Well, what if I'm making a graphic and I want to have the name of the state written out? Well, instead of typing all the names, what if I have a list in a separate file somewhere, I just happen to have this sitting around, right, that has the state abbreviation and the name matched up to it. And I want to transfer this name column back over to my data table, so it makes a third column here. So the key with using VLOOKUP is you need to have something to join on between the two sets of data. So in this case, we have that postal abbreviation in both data sets. Now, the other thing you need to make sure of is, well, first of all, you need to make sure that they are formatted the same. So in this case, they both need to be text, formatted as text. And we can see that they are because the data in the cell is flush left. Notice that the population number is flush right. That indicates a numeric indication. So usually when you're matching on words, usually that formatting is not an issue. It's usually going to work fine. The bigger issue might be spelling. If you're trying to match on words that maybe are spelled differently, that would be another potential problem. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So they're both the same format, text and text, number and number, something like that, right? That's how you're working. And then the other thing is that in whatever table you're pulling information from, which I like to call my lookup table, I think of that as my lookup table, that thing that you're matching on needs to be the leftmost column. Now, it doesn't need to be in column A, it just needs to be the leftmost column, and you're going to see here in a minute how that's going to work. So we've checked those two things off the box. It's set up that way. Now I'm going to show you an optional step that will actually make doing a VLOOKUP easier. What we're going to do is we're going to have Excel, we're going to define this area, this chunk of data, all these two columns and all the 50-some rows, and give it a name so that we can refer to this area of data in our formula using a word rather than having to give cell references and cell addresses. So you highlight your chunk of data. I like to just go right mouse click and go to define name. There's also, you could search for name manager in the tool sets, and it's going to bring up this little box that says new name, and it's automatically given it a default name, usually the first, whatever's in that first cell. But we're going to give it something else. I'm going to call it state names, all in lowercase. Sometimes I call this like state names lookup or something if I want to remember that this is a lookup. You'll notice that I named my sheet lookup. And it does not matter what your sheet is named. It just matters what you're going to name this range of data. And then you want to leave the default, the scope to be workbook. You'll notice here at the bottom that it's saying refers to, and then lookup is in A1 to B53. If we did not do this optional step, that code down there that you see at the bottom is what you would have to type into your formula in a minute. So it's a lot of typing with all those dollar signs and all of that. So we're going to avoid that. So I have it named state names. I'm going to say okay. So now it is named. One way you can check if it's named, I'm going to go look for name manager, and it's, oops, it's looking for something in here. Name manager, there we go, sorry. And it's going to show me that we have one area of data named in this workbook that we have open, and it's called state names, and that's the one we just created, so we're good. You don't need to do that check, but I just thought I'd show you how you find it. And it is possible to come in here and edit that if you somehow realize you screwed up in some way or another. You can edit that one. Okay, so say close. Now I'm going to go back to my data. So we're going to make a new column here called state name. Now the VLOOKUP function has like 4 arguments that you need to feed to it, and this is where it gets hard. And most people, this is something you can't really memorize unless you've been doing it and or teaching it for a very long time. So I recommend to people have a tip sheet that you refer to whenever you need to use this, so you remember how to do it. But Excel also does give you a little hint here of what it's wanting. So it's first asking for what's called the lookup value, which means what cell on this row do you want to look up in the other, in our lookup table, that other table. So in this case, it's A2, that first state abbreviation. Then you put in a comma. So that's the first argument. Now we're on the second argument. This is called table array. Well, that is that lookup table. And really, all we need to put here now is that named range that we put in, state names. And you'll notice when I started typing this, it gave me a guess. Oh, you want state names, that named range you made. And you can hit tab to get it to go in. So that's the second argument. The third argument is column index number. So this is asking for which column in that array do we want to bring over here. And our array has 2 columns. It had that state abbreviation and the name. So we want to bring the second column. Now notice I'm not saying column B, even though that is where that stuff is. Excel only cares about the array that we just made, the one called state names, and it does not recognize A, B, C, D, any of those column labels. So we need to tell it we want the second column of the array. And then range lookup wants either a true or false value. False means we want an exact match, so we want AL to match to AL, AK to match to AK. True means an inexact match, and that would only be used in situations where you want to figure out where something falls in a range. So one example would be, let's say you have police incident data that has date and time of the incident. You could create a little lookup table that says the morning shift for the police officer starts at 6 a.m., the afternoon shift starts at 2 p.m., the evening shift starts at 6 p.m., the night shift starts at midnight, whatever it is. And that's your little lookup table, and then Excel would be able to say, oh, this time falls within this shift, and then this other one falls in that other shift. That's an example for another video, but you do get the idea that you're looking for it to go into buckets, and so it really only works with numbers, dates, times, those kind of sequential things. So most of the time you're going to be putting false here, that exact match. So there's our 4 arguments. We're going to close the parentheses and hit enter. And we've got Alabama, and I'm going to copy it down and make sure it went all the way down. It did. Now, some things that could go wrong. So let's say, I'm going to go back to my lookup table, and I'm going to do a little editing, and let's say DC had periods in it, in this cell here. I'm going to go back to our data table. Because the formulas are still there, it's still trying to pull. So what happened? It's giving me an NA. That means it can't find DC. Well, it's looking for DC, no periods, and that's why it can't find it. So even these little things like periods can trip you up really easily, and that's the kind of thing you would want to go look for if you're getting an NA or some kind of error message. It is also possible that there just isn't a match maybe in your lookup table, and you'd be able to get it to work. Okay, I'm going to show you one more example that is actually a little more common way that I use VLOOKUP. It's for some data cleanup. So here I have, this is death certificate data in Minnesota, people who've died from opioid-related deaths, and you'll see that I have a race column. Well, I'm not real happy with the way they've listed the races, and I want to clean it up a little bit so I can match it to census data. So I'm going to start by doing a pivot table on that race column, and I'm just going to put race in the rows box so I get one instance of each race, and then I'm going to copy that into a new sheet. So this is my original data, and then I want to give it a new label. So you can see that there's some things here with the Asian groups especially. So I'm going to just make my own new buckets that I like. Anybody who's called multi-race, I'm going to put multi. Now there's, what I'm choosing to do here, there's about 1 million ways you could do this. So I'm just making some decisions on the fly here. So I've made a new group, and I want to assign this new group back to each record. Now, unlike our previous example, this pairing back is going to go to many, many records. There's dozens and dozens of records that say Asian Indian, for example, but this is still going to work. So this is going to be our lookup table. To make it easier, I'm going to label my sheet down here. I'm going to label my data sheet. Sometimes I even label my pivot table. So I've called this lookup. Now we have to do that name range. So I highlight this and right mouse click and choose define name. And I'm going to call this race lookup, all one word, all lowercase. Say OK, and really it doesn't matter what you choose that to be. It's just that you need to remember it when you write your formula. So now I'm going to go back to data. Let's put a new column in here next to race, call this new race. And so remember that VLOOKUP, I'll zoom this up for you, has those 4 arguments. So we're going to look up J2, which is that original race, and then we're going to tell it to look at race lookup, which is that array, and we're going to tell it to grab that second column. Again, it just happens to be the second column. You could pull something from a lookup table that has 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 100 columns if you want. You'll see most of the time you're not doing that. And then we'll say false, we want an exact match. And there is our new race added to our data and cleaned up. You can find more videos and tutorials on VLOOKUP at my website.